Chapter 2: Consciousness and Awareness. What exists before meaning? If Chapter 1 challenged the assumption that we experience reality directly, then Chapter 2 asks an even deeper question: what exists before meaning? Because if meaning shapes our experience, well, where does meaning even come from? If meaning is not reality itself, then what is present before the interpretation begins? This question sits at the very heart of human experience. It is a question that philosophers and scientists and mystics and spiritual teachers and psychologists have experienced and explored for thousands of years. Before we can understand meaning, identity, values, perception, and behavior, beliefs is thrown in there too, we must first understand awareness. Because awareness comes first. Before there is a story, there is awareness. Before there is an identity, there is awareness. Before there is a belief, there is awareness. Before there is a judgment, there is awareness. There is simply the capacity to experience. So this chapter explores that space. The space before meaning. The space before interpretation even began. And the space before the world becomes my world. So let's look at the newborn. Imagine a newborn child. The child has no concept whatsoever of success. It has no concept of failure, wealth, poverty, beauty, ugly, confidence, insecurity, good or bad. The child has awareness. The child experiences light. The child experiences sound. The child experiences warmth. The child experiences hunger. The child experiences touch. The child experiences movement and sensation. But there is no story, no interpretation, no identity. The child is not thinking, I am worthy. The child is simply experiencing. This is important because it suggests that awareness exists before meaning. Experiences exist before interpretation. Life is encountered before it is labeled. So the first layer of reality. Most humans believe that reality begins with thought. I do not believe this is true. I believe reality begins with experience. Imagine touching a hot stove. The sensation comes first, the meaning comes second. Imagine hearing music. The sound comes first, the meaning comes second. Imagine standing barefoot in the ocean. The sensation comes first, the meaning comes second. You're getting my drift, right? Awareness encounters experience. Only afterwards does interpretation begin. So this distinction is profound because it reveals something most people never notice. The first layer of reality is experience. The second layer is meaning. Most humans live in the second layer and forget that the first one ever existed. So let's look, naming of the world. As children, we begin learning language. Language changes everything. Before language, there is experience. And after language, well, there's categorization. The child learns tree, sky, dog, mother, mum, beautiful, dangerous, good, bad. Language becomes a tool for organizing the experiences. This is necessary. Without language, we could not communicate well. Without categories, we could not navigate the world in a better way. Yet language also introduces something else: interpretation. The moment we name something, we begin relating to it differently, which can also go in line with labels. So the moment we label something, we create meaning. And some people just want to avoid labels altogether so that they don't create any meaning. Or they're already creating a meaning for not even wanting to label it. However, I digress. This is neither good or bad. It is simply how human consciousness appears to function. So when we look at consciousness as awareness, one way to understand consciousness is to think of it as awareness itself. Not thought, not belief, not identity, just awareness. The capacity to know experience is simply just occurring. You are aware of the sounds. You are aware of the sensations. You're aware of the thoughts. You're aware of your emotions. You're aware of your memories. Notice something interesting though. You are aware of your thoughts. This means awareness and thoughts are not identical. You are aware of your emotions. This means awareness and emotions are not identical. And you are aware of your beliefs. Some of us are. And this means awareness and beliefs are not identical. So awareness appears to be the space within which experience occurs. So it is the container rather than the content. Let's look at the ocean and the waves. Imagine consciousness as the ocean, and the thoughts are the waves. Emotions are waves. Memories are waves. Stories are waves. The ocean remains. The waves change. Most people spend their lives identifying just with the waves. They say, I am anxious. I am depressed. I am broken. I am a failure. Yet these experiences arise and pass. Awareness, though, remains. This is one reason many contemplative traditions throughout history have pointed people back towards awareness. Not because awareness solves every problem, but because awareness reveals that experience is constantly changing. And my own observations throughout my years of just working with people, I noticed something fascinating. When clients became deeply present, the eternal now, right? Something shifted. The story softened. The identity softened. For a moment, there was simply awareness. A woman who had spent years saying, I'm not good enough, would suddenly stop, feel, breathe, notice. And in that moment, she wasn't experiencing inadequacy in any way, shape, or form. She was experiencing sensation, emotion, presence. The story had disappeared temporarily. This observation became one of the foundations of my work because it suggested that meaning is not the deepest layer of human experience, but awareness is. And then the birth of meaning came about. Because if awareness comes first, how does meaning emerge? I believe meaning begins with pattern recognition. Humans are pattern detecting beings. The brain is constantly asking, what's happening? What does this predict? What should I expect? What does this mean? Patterns, well, they help us survive. Imagine a child repeatedly experiences warmth when held by her caregiver. A pattern forms. Safety, connection, belonging. Meaning emerges. Another child experiences inconsistency with that, and a different pattern forms. Uncertainty, instability, hypervigilance. Meaning emerges. So meaning is not randomly created. Meaning emerges from how consciousness interprets patterns of experience. So we have this predictive processing revisited that I want to do, because this aligns with what neuroscience increasingly suggests. The brain is not waiting passively for reality. It's actively predicting. It is constantly generating models about the world. When new information arrives, the brain compares it against existing models. This is efficient, because without prediction, we would be overwhelmed by information. Thousands, tens of thousands of thoughts per second. Yet prediction comes with a cost. Predictions become expectations, and expectations become filters, and filters become meanings, and meanings become realities. So this explains why people often experience different worlds despite living in the same environment. The predictive models differ. Their meanings differ. Their realities differ. So if we take example a child who learns that people leave. I experienced this. Imagine a child whose father frequently disappears. I have one of those. The child experiences absence, confusion, longing, and it's done repeatedly. Eventually a pattern forms. The child's consciousness asks, what does this mean? And the answer becomes, people leave. Yet later the child becomes an adult. A partner takes longer than usual to return a text message. Immediately the nervous system activates. Why? Because the present experience is being interpreted through an older meaning. The event is occurring now. The meaning originated years earlier. The adult believes they are reaching, the adult believes they are reacting to the text message. In reality, they may be reacting to a meaning created decades ago. You're following me, right? So then we get awareness that interrupts the loop. This is where awareness becomes transformative. Awareness allows a person to observe meaning rather than automatically become it. Because without awareness, we have an event, meaning, reaction. With awareness, we have event, meaning, awareness, choice. And that's that ability to respond. So that single extra step changes everything. The meaning may still arise, but now it can be questioned, observed, examined, updated. Awareness creates space. And in that space, new possibilities become available. So the difference between awareness and meaning. Well, let's use a practical example. Imagine standing in front of an audience. Big or small, doesn't matter. Awareness notices heartbeat increasing, warmth in the chest, energy moving through the body. Meaning arrives. I'm nervous. Then another layer appears. What if I fail? Then another. I'm not good enough. Notice that awareness did not create the suffering, meaning did. The body was simply experiencing activation. The interpretation transformed activation into fear. This is a crucial distinction because many experiences are neutral until meaning arrives. Let's revisit that sunset. So returning to that sunset, awareness notices colors, light, warmth, movement. Meaning says beautiful, romantic, sad, spiritual, peaceful. The sunset did not contain those meanings. The observer contributed them. Awareness encountered that reality, and meaning interpreted that reality. And the experience then emerged. And here's the practical exercise. Just observing awareness for 5 minutes. Sit quietly. Do not try to meditate. Do not try to relax. Simply notice. Notice. Notice sounds. 5 minutes. Set a timer. Notice the sounds. Notice sensations in your body. Notice your breathing. Notice your thoughts. When a thought appears, ask, is this awareness? Or is this content appearing within awareness? Notice the difference. The goal is not to stop thinking. The goal is to recognize that awareness exists before the thought. Pause and do that. Another practical exercise is before the story. The next time a strong emotion appears within you, pause and ask, what am I aware of right now? And list only direct experience. For example, tightness is happening in the chest, heat is happening in the face, shallow breathing. Now ask, what story am I adding to this? And write it down. This exercise trains the ability to separate awareness from interpretation. And the more you do it, the more you'll be aware, right? The more clearly this distinction becomes visible, the less automatically meaning controls the experience. And why wouldn't you want that? So let's look at consciousness and the you inverse. So the you inverse proposes that reality is experienced through meaning. Yet meaning is not the deepest layer. Awareness is. Awareness encounters the experience, a pattern emerges, meaning develops, meaning becomes a value. Value becomes your identity. Your identity generates these probabilities, and probabilities influence your behavior, and then your behavior shapes the outcome. But awareness remains present throughout the entire process. Awareness is constant. Meaning changes, identities change, your beliefs change, so do your values, and experiences change. But awareness remains. This may explain why people often describe profound moments of clarity, as feeling like coming home. Not because they discovered something new, because they momentarily encountered what existed before the story. So let's look at the great forgetting. Perhaps one of the greatest challenges of being human is that we forgot awareness. We become immersed in meanings. We became immersed in identities. We became immersed in stories. Eventually, we mistake them for ourselves. We forget that before every belief, before every fear, before every certainty, there is awareness. We forget that awareness witnessed the creation of every meaning we now call reality. And the result is that we live inside interpretations without realizing they are interpretations. The you inverse begins reversing this process. It begins with recognizing that meaning is not reality. Then it moves deeper. It recognizes that awareness exists before meaning. And if awareness exists before meaning, then perhaps no meaning is permanent. No identity is fixed. No story is final. Every meaning can be re-examined. Every interpretation can be questioned. Every reality can be experienced differently. Not because reality changes, but because consciousness becomes aware of the meanings through which reality is being experienced. That awareness marks the beginning of transformation. It marks the beginning of freedom. And it marks the beginning of understanding the deepest principle of the you inverse. Before there is meaning, there is awareness. Before there is identity, there is awareness. And before there is the world you think you live in, there is awareness. And it is from that awareness that every human reality is ultimately born.